Hey guys, thank you so much for joining us once again. This is podcast number 5 with me and Jake, our informal conversations about typology, functions, MBTI, all the things that are on our minds in a very extroverted, intuitive way where we sort of cover things going back and forth between the two of us, bouncing ideas off each other. I'm Peter, I'm an ENFP, and joining me today as always is Jake, INTP. How are you, Jake?
Hello, Peter. Doing good. I should change my blinds a little bit, but it's a nice day in LA, which by that I mean it's kind of cloudy, which we take. Yeah, we don't get weather here. It's like living in a controlled dome. So we'll take the clouds as a break from the sun. We don't take clouds for granted here. Other people don't take the sun for granted.
Yeah, that's an interesting fact. I was in Los Angeles myself for a period of time, and it's a very interesting place. It's sort of like a place where time stands still in terms of seasons because it's constantly sunny. The sun is shining constantly, so it's a bit like being stuck in time, but in a very pleasing, easygoing way.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's very, very easy to lose track of time when you don't have seasons, because it was a very interesting insight. I want to say, I hope this isn't wrong, but I think his name was Julian Barbour, who's a British scientist, who has pointed out, and it's one of those things where I like thinking about things that don't seem right at first, but oh wait, no, he is right. And he said that if we didn't have things moving, we wouldn't even have a sense that there was a thing like time. And it's like, wait, hold on. No, time is what makes things move. But then I thought, wait, no, hold on. It's because things are moving that we even think that there's a time. If nothing was changing, why would we think there's some secret thing called time ticking away in the background that doesn't affect anything? You know,
that is very interesting.
I
remember it is really interesting. Yeah, I remember reading that article at one point when scientists, there was this, I think it was, what's that big scientist magazine called? The big one, the main
Nature,
Scientific something.
There's Nature is the big journal. Scientific American is a popular magazine.
I think it's Scientific American I read. Yeah, but they just did a throwaway article where they said scientists have found out that time doesn't exist, blah, 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 blah. It was very short, where it blew my mind because it was just, they treated it like it was just some, oh yeah, by the way, time doesn't exist. And it blew my mind in a very substantial way.
Yeah, well, so a lot of those things where they say time don't exist, a lot of times those headlines are misleading, but they may have been referring to some theories where time is sort of like a secondary effect or a false force, in the sense of like our weather patterns are created by centrifugal force, which isn't a real force, but is something that is created by two things acting on each other, kind of stuff, that kind of stuff. But I actually hate popular science articles. I think they do more damage than anything a lot of the time. Most science articles are really bad. I've done like 300 different news stories on my channel, probably. And I like science. Probably 10% of them are science, and then or health, because it's just terrible. It's just all the popular literature is just terrible.
Maybe it's a TE thing, extroverted thinking, but I really like the popular science thing because it gives they use a lot of metaphors, and they compare things to things that I can recognize in the world, where it's easier for me to grasp concepts when it's done through popular science than the very deep stuff. But that's probably also because introverted thinking is my blind spot as an ENFP. And we're going to talk about the ENFP type today during our conversation.
That's right, we should. Actually, I realized, speaking of talking and conversation, I didn't set our usual timer. But did you want to take any particular angle on that conversation? Because I've been thinking about it since we last talked the ENFP type.
Well, I think, and this is just, of course, my opinion. I think that the ENFP is very easy to misunderstand or get wrong in a lot of ways. Where if you go to a lot of online forums, or if you go to Reddit pages about the different types, ENFPs are usually seen as this very agreeable, very easygoing person that doesn't have a lot of worries. But I think a lot of it stems from insecurities, constantly changing opinions about things, so not wanting to commit to having a strong stance on something, because you have that very heavy extroverted intuition that constantly picks up new information and changes how you look at the world and how your FI defines itself, introverted feeling, defines itself in the world. So I would go through stages constantly where I would strongly identify as someone who wanted to go to law school, and then it would just go away slowly but surely as I picked up more information about something else, and then, oh, I really want to go to film school, or it's
a very interesting aspect, because what you have with introverted feeling, which is sort of a mysterious function too, and the way introverted thinking is in this sort of personal identity and personal definition is a big part, I find, of introverted feeling. And so when you have an ENFP or ESFP, which the dynamics are telling you is introverted feeling is in a creative position, that always was interesting to me, because does that mean that you are creating yourself or finding yourself in some way in the process of life, or in the process of your actions and your behaviors?
Yeah. If you look at someone like Robin Williams, who I think most people agree was an ENFP, he would have these very silly roles, these very slapstick roles, but then he would turn around and make movies like Good Will Hunting, where he showed an incredible depth and this very heavy side to himself and his acting. So I think there's a lot of layers.
All of his best movies are, with a couple notable exceptions for comedies, but all of his best movies are dramatic movies.
I agree. Yeah. World's Greatest Dad, for instance, which is a dark comedy.
You told me about that. I still haven't seen that one. The Bobcat Goldthwait directed. I have it on my hard drive. I just haven't seen it. It's
really good. Yeah, Goldthwait is a real hit and miss guy, but that was a good one. Yeah,
I actually like Bobcat. He's one of those guys. I think he might be misunderstood on the TI side of things.
Probably, yeah. He made a movie about what was it? It was the Blair Witch Project, kind of, but about Bigfoot, which was not great. But he's a very interesting guy, which is more than what that's always a plus for someone who still makes movies. Someone you can say has a point of view or is interesting at least as a voice, I think. But there's so many specific things about each type that you could get into with Socionics. That you could see with me moving my head and arms around a lot. Rapid eye movement as a sign of extroverted intuition. Not. Whereas someone with extroverted sensing would make more eye contact. And we both, I think, kind of do this, kind of scan the room as we're talking and not looking directly into the camera all that often, because that's not as important to us.
True, yeah. I'm very conscious of the fact that my visual cortex is occupied with images I'm not seeing. That's very concretely apparent to me. It's pretty easy to conjure that up in other people too. I've had in conversations where it's just, you can imagine there's these beaches in Hawaii that are black sand beaches because there's a lot of volcanic activity, and you can imagine yourself standing on the black sand beach. Now, wherever that image is, it's not around you. It's not related to like anything perceptual, and unless you've been there, it's certainly not related to any memories in your head. And I feel like a lot of that imagistic conjuring, I've never thought about it particularly in a typological context, but I'm very much aware that I'm not always looking. I'm looking at something, but it's not always what's around me.
That's a very good point, and that's also I find introverted sensing versus extroverted sensing is very fascinating. The way that you interact with the physical world and your relationship to the world. Whereas introverted sensors, people use introverted sensing in their four main functions, tend to more. My perception has been more interested or in love with the concept or the idea of a place, whereas extroverted sensors are more interested in the feeling or the sensation of being in a place, and it's more of an idea why you like something, the concept and the idea of it with introverted sensing, versus the more physical acts that you do when you're at that place for extroverted sensors.
I mean, there is something to, I can almost feel like I'm not big on physical. I mean, like most Americans, I'm not well traveled, but I don't particularly. I feel like I can get a lot out of just looking at a series of pictures of a place rather than the idea of actually packing my things, going to the airport, getting my bag,
yes.
All of that crap. Like, is it really worth the payoff to just sit there and look at Angkor Wat? I'm sure it's incredible. And I want to go once before I die just for architectural reasons. But I obviously don't care that much, or else I would have already been there, wouldn't I?
Yeah, I think an extroverted sensor would be more. It would be more important to have interacted with that part of the world than for an introverted sensor, because I think
Right.
we are sort of better at making an image in our mind and thinking, okay, so this is what it would be like to be at that place, and it would be more the things that we would be interested in would be more like the architecture or the some kind of thing that we connect with that place. And then I feel that way too as an ENFP, where it's more of my idea of the world is more important than actually what I do in the world. What I yeah.
I was going to say, while we're on the subject, in case this opportunity passes us by, and at the risk of unfortunately reading, I wanted to put this from Wikisocion, talking about introverted sensing with respect to peace, because I was doing obviously a little bit of research. And so, but I thought this was particularly funny. And I'm going to translate the letters to MBTI letters to prevent confusion. The ENFP tends to be chronically unaware of his own bodily processes, including physiological sensations and a sense of balance and alignment with one's true desires. I suppose they mean a physical sense. He sometimes has peculiar preferences or tastes, which he himself is unable to understand or fulfill. In terms of physical sensations, an ENFP will almost always choose the familiar over the novel because they know that the familiar is reliable in the positive sensation it delivers. An ENFP will typically have a single item he orders at certain restaurants without fail. Is that true?
Yes. I will say, though, with a caveat. Go on. I'll mention.
Oh, go on. I got. It's easy for me to keep my place on this than vice versa.
Cool. Okay. Well, I will say it's that might be one of the. It's true what you've read, but it might be one of those ENFP secrets that we kind of keep to ourselves because we want to appear like we're very worldly and we want to try new things constantly. But there is definitely a thing in us that I think we kind of resent, where it's so comforting knowing where you are and ordering the thing you're familiar with because you know it tastes good and you have these routines. And about the balance thing, that's so spot on. I was just talking with someone about not be if I'm focusing on something very specific and I'm completely fascinated and tuned into that event, sometimes I will feel like I'm slipping, like I'm losing actual touch. So I will sort of start tilting, and I have to bring myself back into my body because I
kind of relate to that.
Like, yeah. It's like I'm losing touch with reality, and I'm sort of forgetting my own body in a strange way. Yeah.
I'll continue the article. If he isn't in the mood for that item, returning back to food, he doesn't eat there. He will stubbornly refuse to eat anything he knows he does not like, refusing to try a new recipe of anything that he did not like before. The ENFP would much rather sleep in his own bed than anywhere else as a matter of familiarity. I'm like that way too. I really actually don't like sleeping in other people's places if I can avoid it. But this preference never enters his mind when a friend invites him to stay the night, sometimes resulting in a lack of quality sleep that the ENFP will forget about the next time around. ENFPs almost never emphasize his attractiveness or sexuality overtly and publicly, but dreams of being pleasing to at least a small circle of trusted friends and partners who are able to develop and enhance his sexuality and attractiveness in a trusting atmosphere. I won't make you comment on that if you don't want to. He will obsess about his looks in front of the mirror, trying to get the right combination of preparedness and liberated comfort. That you just have to put you have to put effort in that casual look. It's not so easy to be so casual.
Yeah. There's definitely truth to that statement. Yeah, to what you just said. What was the first thing you said? There was one thing that really struck, and now I kind of put it out of my mind again.
Oh goodness, I don't know. He often will obsess about his looks in front of the mirror, trying to get the right combination of preparedness and liberated comfort. But before that, it was how the lack of the tendency to push one's sexuality overtly, to be more alluring, I suppose, would be the phrase. That would be what it said before.
Yeah. Well, we are sort of, now that we're in Socionics, we are referred to as the infantiles, as in our group, and I think there is definitely a naivete to being an ENFP in a way. It's more we secretly don't. We secretly hope for and wish that people would throw themselves at us and we don't really feel comfortable. I'm speaking as a group, but this is just like a general guide outline. We generally don't feel comfortable making the first move because we I don't know why, but it is, yeah, it is.
I think what's interesting too is that from the outside, and I'm sure every ENFP has heard this in the world, and it takes them by surprise or catches them off guard. But I think because ENFPs are very voracious about life and and there's an optimism that carries with that and comes with that. In order to be curious about the world, you must be to some extent optimistic as well. And because and so what happens is that enthusiasm and that love for life gets interpreted by somebody as enthusiasm and love for them as an individual. And whether it be misinterpretation by the person you're talking to or misinterpretation by partners or friends, ENFPs get a reputation of being very flirtatious when in fact that's not exactly what's going on at all for them.
Exactly. It's just a chronic curiousness about other people and about how they see the world. That extroverted intuition, again, that's just picking up new information and wanting to hear different perspectives and different stories. And you're so right. I think I forgot it again. This part needs to be cut out.
Never. I like not cutting things. I feel like it.
All right.
Because it keeps. We did have that one cut because of technical reasons, but I feel like it keeps us on the high wire and it keeps us honest, and we can't hide anything from the audience. But I'll just continue because I didn't quite finish. It is embarrassing to come to an event overdressed, returning to the ENFP Wikisocion article. It is embarrassing to come to an event overdressed, as the ENFP would rather look like they simply came on a whim than overprepared. They will usually undermine the time spent in preparation and will avoid speaking on the topic altogether, the topic of the event, I'm assuming. When getting sick, the ENFP may stubbornly refuse or conveniently forget to take any sort of medicine. Their chosen method, I should say, of dealing with sickness and physical discomfort is ignoring it until it can no longer be ignored. An ENFP will frequently forget meals and sleep when excitedly working on a new project or in some sort of social gathering. Exhaustion, hunger, thirst, and full bladders will be ignored until the need is overwhelming and affects the ENFP's concentration. I do notice this when I'm hanging out with I have an ENFP friend we've been friends for a long time. But yeah, man, that guy, I wonder if he even has bodily processes sometimes. I'm like, do you ever have to pee?
Yeah, it is. I think it's also just extroverted intuition and extroverted thinking is sort of an acceleration of ideas and movement and thoughts and ideas. So it's just, you keep building steam as you're going, and the more you're talking, the more ideas you're getting, and the speed just keeps going up, and you don't want to stop the train because you're on a roll. So if you're enjoying someone's company and you're having a meaningful conversation, or if you're at a party and you've struck up a new acquaintance, you want to enjoy it for as long as possible, because it's like it's feeding you good vibes, and it's feeding you information that you never thought you needed, but you feel you need now. So it is like a high, in a sense, that feeling of we need to keep this going. We need to keep this sensation going. Yeah, for sure.
It is interesting. On the introverted side, it's, I certainly like that, but it's more like, you need a sweet thing to eat or something for the day. It's a craving that can be sated and then goes,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But it is. I love Socionics because it can be so specific. I just started college, and I struck up an acquaintance with a girl who I'm terrible at typing people. Let that be known. I think that's an FI thing, maybe, of not really being able to read other people and categorize people myself. But I spotted this girl who's in my class, and I thought to myself, I think she's an ENFP, and I made her take the test, and she took the test, and it's so interesting to know she was an ENFP, which was interesting. And just knowing the details of Socionics, that they might not all apply to her, but it made it much easier for me to connect with her as a person.
Was there anything in particular you feel made you, or any action specific, or was it just a general sense that made you feel like this person was an ENFP?
It was a combination of a lot of things. Body language is something that I'm really picking up on, especially I think it's fairly obvious once you've read about it how to pick up on extroverted intuition with rapid movement of the body and flickering eyes, like just eyes moving as you're thinking, and
So it's more you're
moving
looking
your
for
body a
tells.
lot. A
You're
lot.
looking for tells for extroverted intuition first.
Yes, that's what the only thing right now that I'm comfortable with looking for, along with eye contact and SE, because I don't personally. This is something that we've talked about before. I always kind of approach typology as a self-help thing primarily, more so than a way of categorizing people or gaining a grasp on how other people feel. That's secondary to me. That's also very interesting, but the main reason I got into it was to see how I could improve as a person, who I was. Again, the ENFP looking for information, trying to figure out who you are, trying to pinpoint what you want to do and what you're good at and what you're not good at. And that's how I approached and kind of still approach typology, as more of a guide to myself in the world, to see what, not just how I am, but how other people perceive it. And that's very interesting to me. And that's why I don't really feel comfortable typing other people myself. But I couldn't help myself with her, because it really struck me how the things that I'd read I could see on her face, and she's really into it now. And just it is like a subculture almost, typology, where you can, if you're both aware of it, you can share very personal things that you would be uncomfortable bringing up in conversation, and talk about it honestly in a more scientific way. And I think it's wonderful when you know the system. Yeah,
Yeah, it's
big fan of.
interesting to see where those typology communities can go in this age of the internet, where the costs for communication are so low, and it almost becomes, because it is a theory, it has a technical jargon attached to it, and that jargon can serve as a lingua franca for people who are in different countries and so forth, who may have limited commands of one another's language. As long as you're sort of speaking about the same ideas, you can kind of fill in the gaps on a lot of things. Or maybe you don't need much information. Or even typology memes cut across a lot of these cultural differences, which are funny.
Yeah, they're great.
So it's I was going to ask you, do you have any opinions or impressions of ISFP type people, or you don't really have that many in your life?
I really admire ISFP people. I think the ISFP people that I've come across have been very direct, somewhat harsh at times. They have a very funny sense of humor. They're very different to myself, but I feel like I understand where they're coming from. They're generally very extroverted and very artistically minded, I think, in the way that they present themselves to the world and what they want to do with their lives. I think some of the most talented musicians and painters have been ISFPs. They're not my closest friends. I don't click with them like that, but I highly admire them.
Well, this is interesting. The reason I ask is because by Socionics intertype, your relationship to ISFP would be the same relationship of INTP-ENFP, which is one of supervision. I'm technically the ENFP supervisor type, which means basically it would be very hard for you to get an angle on my TI. Not impossible to get an angle by way of NE, but it's an asymmetrical relationship. Because my NE isn't that weak, so totally useless. But I was wondering if there was any insight on that side. But if you don't encounter many ISFPs, so be it. But yeah, I do encounter a lot of ENFPs. It is interesting. I mean, how that all works. I feel like ENFPs and INTPs have very similar circles of behavior, or might find themselves in the same places more often. I'm not sure if it's the case or not in the case of ISFPs and ENFPs, but I definitely think that INTPs and ENFPs are entertained. They might be at the same music festivals. They might be at the same movies. They might be at the same bookstore. There's a lot of similarities in the way they live that would cause them to run into each other. Or even on the internet. I think extroverted intuition people love being on the internet. we run the internet. Probably literally. Probably a lot of extroverted intuitive people work in IT and systems administration. I mean, that's where I make most of my money, is working with computers and networks. And there's certainly a good amount of INFPs and ENTPs and ENFPs in that field.
It makes sense, because extroverted intuition is great at sponging up information while also coming up with new ways of doing things. So I would imagine in that field, you would need a lot of new ideas constantly on how to connect different wires and branches of what you're doing to create new things and improve on things that are currently not working as well as they should. So
that's where some of the things about extroverted intuition get a bit more clarified, as a TI using type versus you as an FI using type, which is the analogy of a map in extroverted intuition, I think, holds very well, in the sense that a map is a very, very specific, concrete representation of something that can be wrong. It can be wrong, like it could be dead wrong. And there are consequences if it's wrong. And so I think, in the literal sense, that, like, when I work, without putting up too much detail, I worked in an online services company where a certain group, it was global, and a certain group of people from Europe couldn't access something that people in North America could access. And we're just talking about server A and server B. And on the internet, there are a bunch of intermediary connecting services and third-party companies, big companies, small companies, that will route you from this point to this point, whether you're connected in this kind of a hangout or going on the internet or playing a game or whatever it is. So we had to ascertain where in that chain was the failure, who needed to call who, because it wasn't necessarily our responsibility to call the person, because we weren't necessarily the client. They just couldn't connect to our service, and they were calling us because they wanted to know what was going on. And so all of that stuff is this, in a sense, very physically super concrete, but in another sense, very, very abstract, because these networks are dynamic. They will reroute automatically, and we have to find out if there's a way to do that. And all that stuff can be communicated very easily, I find, with types that are extroverted, intuitive using types, for whatever that means, whether that means that all these technologies were developed by extroverted intuitives, I don't know. Whether or not it fits in with the way we think anyway, I don't know. But it sure is easy to know, like, we were talking about seeing things we weren't seeing. It sure is easy to know that there are other people darting their eyes around, capable of visualizing these extraordinary abstract networks, which in the end of the day are just cables under the ground,
Right. That's a great way of putting it. Yeah, I think there is such a big difference in how you present yourself if you're an ENFP versus an INTP, in speech and in things that you present. But the underlying way of coming up with new ideas, way of connecting things, like you said, is sort of the same concept. It's more of I was just watching an interview with Mac DeMarco, who I believe is an ENFP, and he reminded me of something, and that is that he constantly kind of undercuts his statements by saying, I don't know, maybe, and I think. And that's something that I've noticed in myself too, that extroverted intuition that cross-analyzes situations and intentions, so much so that it becomes harder and harder to make firm statements like, this is stupid. It becomes more of you say it, but you undercut it as well, as like, I don't know, I think that's stupid. So it's more of a...
I remember talking about this before with an INFP, and people being, especially in my youth, irritated by it. But now that I've gotten a little older and I've thought about it, I can actually defend the practice pretty well, and I think it has to do as much with extroverted intuition, because whenever you're talking about that, you're talking about an introverted judgment process connecting to extroverted perception. A lot of it has to do with introverted judgment, and how that judgment does personally resolve down to the one and the individual and you, or even them and that guy over there, what he thinks that's what he says, that's what that guy says. Doesn't necessarily mean that's what it is, or that's a fact. And so I think that's a lot of the times when a perception type, or a P-type, an MBTI P-type, we're often forced or pressured culturally, I think, by extroverted judgment people to like just make a statement or make a decision or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But the greatest truth to us is that what we're saying is our perspective and is our opinion and is our best guess. And it's interesting because an INTP will sometimes be interpreted as really super, super rigid because we're so absolute about things. But when we change absolutely. When it was absolutely the new thing, and we become the thing for that. But at the end of the day, I think the proper way of talking, at least when you're using introverted judgment, it is, hey, at the end of the day, this is what I think, and take that for what it's worth. Because we aren't prone to make the kind of statements, I think, that can justifiably be either universal or absolute or completely like working in all contingencies. I don't think we make those kind of statements.
Yeah, and I also think we're very aware that we work in bursts of all kind. Extroverted intuition in every sense it's a lot of observing and then short bursts of action. So it's more of it's less dependable and more explosive in the way that it works. You can get a lot of stuff done in a short amount of time because you spend so much time taking in information, observing what's right and what's wrong and what works and doesn't work.
In your greatest period of activity, it can actually look quite passive.
Exactly. Judgers would see that as being very passive and lazy, but in reality, it's more of an inactive prep time for doing something in the future. So that's what I think judgers would perceive extroverted intuition as being from the outside, not knowing how their brains work.
All right. Well, since we're not going to be editing this, we should be editing ourselves, because I don't know when I started the clock, but we're probably at least at about a half hour, maybe even a little bit more. So I'll just thank you for joining me. You can talk us out at the end, and you can join me, and I'll keep making videos on my channel. But thanks for hanging in there for episode 5. I know for some people it's going to be the first episode, so I'll try to link the previous episodes on my channel as well as a link to Peter's channel.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. It's always a blast doing these videos. I always learn something from hearing what Jake has to say about things that are brought up, and I hope that our insights can sort of inspire you to read more about Socionics if you're not familiar with it, or share your wisdom if you know a lot about it in the comment section, or join us on Discord and help us make more meaningful conversations happen. Which,
yeah, if you agree or disagree with anything we said, it's all our introverted judgment. So we would love to know if your opinion resonates with this, or if you think we're totally nuts. That we're okay with that too.
Very okay with it. Yep.
Well, all right, well, thank you guys so much, Peter. Until next time, we'll try to make it episode 6. I know we can at least get to lucky 7, so we have to at least get to lucky 7. But I'll see you. We have to get to lucky number
7. Yeah, exactly. Perfect. Okay. Thanks for watching, guys.